I've been a regular at the Rusty Anchor for as long as I can remember. It's a dive bar, one of those places that feels like it's been stuck in time. Dim lighting, dusty bottles on the shelves, the smell of stale beer mixing with the wood and tobacco. The kind of place where the bartender knows your name, and you can sit in the same spot night after night without anyone questioning it. For years, I had a particular stool that I always sat on, a spot by the jukebox where I could people watch and lose myself in the rhythm of the place. But all of that changed when I began to notice the whispers. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The sounds in a bar can get distorted, voices blending together, the hum of the jukebox, the clinking of glasses. But there was something about these whispers that didn't sit right. They weren't just random chatter. They were distinct, muffled but unmistakably words, like someone was speaking directly to me, just out of reach. I tried to ignore it, blaming the noise of the bar, or perhaps the drinks. But it kept happening. Every time I sat down, those whispers would swirl around me, getting closer, like they were right behind my ear. But it wasn't just the whispers. It was the cold. At first, I thought the air conditioning had kicked on, but it wasn't that. It was a bone-chilling cold, like a draft that would sweep across me whenever I sat on the stool. I'd shiver uncontrollably, even though the bar was always warm, and I'd glance around to see if anyone else seemed to feel it. But they never did. No one ever seemed to notice the chill. But me. I started to avoid sitting on the stool when I could. But the truth was, it was the only spot in the bar that felt like home. It was where I could sink into the comfort of the familiar. My glass of whiskey, the distant hum of conversation, the clink of the pool balls in the back. But every time I sat down, that damn cold would return, and the whispers would follow, always just out of my line of sight. I couldn't escape it. One night, as I was nursing my drink, I noticed the bartender, Tim, watching me. Tim had worked at the Rusty Anchor for as long as I could remember. He was an old-timer, someone who'd been around since the bar first opened. He was usually pretty quiet, but tonight, his gaze was intense, like he was waiting for something. I didn't think much of it until he leaned in close, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "You're still sitting there, huh?" he said, glancing over at the stool with a look I couldn't quite place. I frowned. "What are you talking about?" "The stool," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "You don't know the history behind it, do you?" I shook my head, unsure where this conversation was headed. "It's just a stool, Tim." He sighed, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "That stool's got a dark past. It's been here longer than any of us. People come and go, but that stool, it's cursed." I laughed, but it came out uneasy. "Cursed? Are you serious?" Tim's eyes grew dark, and for the first time in the years I'd known him, I saw fear in his gaze. "You're not the first person to sit there, you know. Hell, you're not even the second. That stool's been around since the bar opened, and every time someone sits there, strange things start happening. People hear things, see things. Some of them don't ever leave." I chuckled nervously, but Tim's expression didn't change. "What are you talking about? Like ghosts?" Tim's voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm not sure what it is, but it's not just a ghost. A guy named Charlie sat there about 10 years ago. Regular, just like you. One night, he collapsed, had a heart attack or something. But before he died, he kept whispering, like he was talking to someone who wasn't there. He died right on that stool, right in front of everyone." I felt the hairs on the back of my neck prickle, but I tried to brush it off. "That's just a coincidence." Tim shook his head, his expression growing darker. "I wish it was. A couple of months later, another guy sat there, just like you do. Same stool. He disappeared. Vanished. No one saw him leave, and no one ever found him. He just disappeared. And it's happened a few more times since then. People go missing, and it's always the same stool." I looked over at the stool, really looked at it for the first time. The worn leather, the scratches in the wood, the faded imprint where countless other regulars had sat. But now, with Tim's words hanging in the air, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. The whispers seemed louder now, and I could feel a coldness spreading through my chest, the same chill I'd felt every time I sat there. "Tim, you're scaring me," I said, my voice shaky. "It's just a damn stool." But Tim was silent for a long moment, his eyes locked on me. "I know it sounds crazy, but just think about it. Every time someone sits there, something happens. And I've seen the way you look at it. I know you feel it too. There's something in that stool, and it's not going to let you go." I couldn't get up fast enough. The stool suddenly felt like a trap, an invisible hand gripping my chest, forcing me to stay. I took my drink and walked out, feeling the cold draft follow me even as I left the bar. I haven't been back to the Rusty Anchor since that night. Every time I drive past, I glance over at the bar, and my gaze always lingers on that corner. I can't shake the feeling that something, or someone, is still sitting there, waiting. I don't know what Tim meant when he said the stool has a dark past. Maybe he was right. Maybe it's just my mind playing tricks on me. But I can't help but wonder, what if that stool is tied to something far more sinister? What if I'm not the last person to ever sit there? I don't think I'll ever go back to find out. But I do know one thing for sure. There's something in that bar, and it's waiting for the next person to sit down. It was just another Friday night at the Drunken Sailor, a dive bar that felt like home. Dim lights flickered above the faded tables, and the smell of stale beer and fried food hung in the air. The bar had a certain charm, despite its rundown appearance. You could always find the same faces there, the regulars who came for a drink and a quick escape from their hectic lives. I was one of them, sitting at the worn wooden counter with my group of friends, enjoying the usual banter. We'd been there for hours, our voices growing louder with each round of drinks. As the night wore on, the noise around us became a comforting white noise. The jukebox played softly in the corner, mixing the sounds of rock and country, and everything felt like it was unfolding, as it always did. But then something happened, something that I can't quite explain. It started with a glance. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed him, a man sitting alone at a table by the window, his face partially obscured by the dim light. He was just sitting there, staring ahead, not moving. I tried to ignore him, convincing myself that he was just another lonely soul passing through. But for some reason, my gaze kept returning to him, drawn to the way he sat so still, like he was waiting for something, or someone. I nudged Brian, who was sitting beside me, and pointed subtly toward the man. "Who's that guy?" I asked, trying to keep my voice low so as not to disturb the atmosphere. Brian looked over, squinting slightly, before shrugging. "I don't know. Maybe he's a regular." I nodded, though I wasn't entirely convinced. He seemed out of place. The regulars in the bar were usually loud and rowdy, with a story to tell, and a beer in hand. But this man, he was different. He wasn't part of the usual crowd. His clothes were worn, a dark jacket with frayed edges, and his hands were clasped tightly in front of him on the table, as though he was waiting for something to happen. For the next hour, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every time I looked over at him, his eyes were locked onto me. No, not just onto me, but onto us, the whole group. His stare was unnervingly intense, and his face was expressionless, almost blank. It was as if he knew something we didn't, something dark and unsettling. Still, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I was just drunk, or maybe I had too much of the night's conversation swirling in my head. But then, at one point, I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. The man hadn't moved, not once. His drink was still sitting in front of him, untouched, his eyes fixed on the group. His presence seemed to hang over the room like an oppressive weight, and I couldn't escape it. The night wore on, and the bar began to empty out. Most of the regulars had called it a night, and the remaining few were slowly shuffling out. But the man in the corner hadn't budged. He remained seated, his gaze unblinking, as if he was part of the shadows that filled the bar. It was then that I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. The bartender, Tim, was wiping down the counter and glanced over at the man. I saw his expression shift from casual indifference to something darker. There was a look of unease in his eyes, and he quickly turned away, as though trying to shake off something he didn't want to acknowledge. He didn't say anything, but I could feel the tension in the air, and it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Finally, the bar began to close. Tim made his rounds, telling people to finish their drinks, and the last of the patrons stumbled out into the night. My friends and I were lingering, chatting about nothing in particular, when I looked back toward the corner. The man was still there, still sitting in the same spot, his eyes locked onto me once again. But this time, there was something different in his gaze. It was no longer just watching. It was knowing, almost as if he was waiting for me to acknowledge him. As we all stood to leave, I caught a glimpse of his face one last time. It was then that I realized something I hadn't before. The man was dead. I didn't know how I knew, but I felt it deep within my bones. He wasn't just some drunk. He wasn't just another lonely man who stumbled into a bar. No, this man had been here long before we arrived, long before the bar had opened its doors that night. We stepped outside into the cool night air, the door of the drunken sailor swinging shut behind us. I felt the weight of the man's gaze on my back, following me, even as I walked away. I turned to my friends, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that was creeping up my spine. I smiled, laughed it off. But deep down, I couldn't escape the sensation that something was off. The man in the corner, Bill Hayes, the regular no one spoke of, was still with us. The following week, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The image of his face, his cold stare, haunted me. I went back to the bar, hoping to put the unease behind me. But the same thing happened. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And this time, when I asked Tim about him, he gave me an answer that made my blood run cold. "That man," Tim said, his voice barely above a whisper, "was Bill Hayes. He used to come here every night, same time, same spot. That was his chair, the corner. But one night, he didn't leave. He had a heart attack in that very seat right there, and we couldn't do anything about it. The ambulance came, but by the time they got him out of here, he was gone." My stomach dropped as the truth settled in. Bill Hayes wasn't just some regular who happened to be in the bar. He was a man who had died in that very spot, and his spirit hadn't moved on. It was still there, watching, waiting. Tim leaned in closer, his face pale. Ever since that night, people swear they've seen him sitting in that corner. They say he never left, that his spirit still haunts the place. Maybe you saw him, maybe you didn't. But I'm telling you, there's something about that corner, something that isn't right. I didn't need any more convincing. The man who had been sitting in the corner, the one who had watched us, wasn't alive. He was a ghost, a lingering presence that refused to leave. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if he would ever let me forget it. Now every time I walk into the Drunken Sailor, I feel his presence. I can almost hear his breath behind me, feel his eyes watching me from the shadows. He's still there, still waiting. And somehow, I know he'll always be there. Because once you've been marked by a ghost, it's impossible to escape. Bill Hayes is still in that corner, and no matter how many drinks I have, or how many nights I spend there, I'll never forget the man who never left. It was a cold night when I first walked into the Old Lantern, an ancient bar tucked away on the corner of a forgotten street. The kind of bar you'd pass by and never give a second glance to, yet something about it always caught my eye. I'd been meaning to try it for weeks, and tonight, something urged me to stop. As soon as I pushed open the creaky door, a musty, earthy smell greeted me, like old wood and stale beer, but the warmth inside was inviting, a stark contrast to the chilly wind outside. The bar was dimly lit, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the low hum of murmured conversations. A few people were scattered around, sitting alone or in small groups, lost in their own worlds. I sat down at the bar, and immediately, the bartender, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a tired look in his eyes, noticed me. His gaze was steady but wary, like he was sizing me up. "What can I get you?" he asked, his voice rough, yet oddly soft, almost as if he were afraid to speak too loudly. "I'll have a gin and tonic," I said, smiling politely. His eyes lingered on me for a moment, and I noticed a brief flicker of hesitation in his expression before he nodded and turned to the shelves. "Coming right up." I didn't think much of it at first, but as I watched him prepare the drink, I began to feel a strange unease settle in my chest. Something about his movements was off. He was slow, deliberate, as though he were trying to avoid making too much noise, or perhaps to avoid my gaze. His hands were shaky as he poured the gin into the glass, and his face was pale under the low bar lights. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that it was just a normal night at a slightly run-down bar. When he placed the glass in front of me, I smiled in thanks, but he didn't smile back. Instead, he just nodded slowly, his eyes locking with mine, as though trying to convey a message without words. "Enjoy," he murmured, then walked away without another glance. I shrugged it off and picked up the glass, the condensation cool against my fingers. The gin had a sharp, almost bitter scent, and when I took the first sip, I noticed the taste was much stronger than I was used to. A strange metallic tang lingered on my tongue, but I didn't think much of it. It was strong, probably stronger than most drinks, but I figured the bartender just had his own way of mixing. It didn't take long for things to go wrong. As I continued to sip my drink, a strange sensation began creeping through my body. At first, it was subtle, a slight dizziness, like I hadn't eaten in hours. But as the minutes passed, the feeling intensified. My vision started to blur, and my body felt as though it were becoming unmoored from the world around me, like I was floating outside of my own skin. I gripped the edge of the bar, hoping the sensation would pass, but it only grew worse. The room around me seemed to warp, as though the walls were breathing. The people sitting near me blurred into a haze of shadows, and the air itself felt thick, oppressive, like I was drowning in it. Panic began to rise in my chest, and I blinked rapidly, trying to clear my vision, but it didn't help. And then, the vision started. At first, it was just a flash of movement in the corner of my eye, a fleeting shadow that danced across the dimly lit wall. I turned quickly, expecting to see someone walk by, but there was no one there. The bartender was still tending to the other customers, his back to me, oblivious to my growing panic. Then the whispers began. At first, they were soft, barely audible, like distant voices carried by the wind. But as I tried to focus on them, the whispers grew louder, more distinct, until they felt as though they were coming from inside my own head. They were calling my name softly at first, and then urgently, desperately, as though something or someone was trying to reach me. I looked around the bar in a frenzy, but no one seemed to notice. The bartender was still moving, slow and methodical, cleaning glasses and chatting with the other patrons, unaware of what was happening to me. My pulse raced, and I felt my hands shake uncontrollably. That's when I saw him. In the reflection of the bar mirror, there was a figure standing behind me. A tall man in a dark coat, his face obscured by shadow. His eyes glowed, an unnatural red, and his mouth twisted into a cruel, knowing smile. He stood motionless, just behind my shoulder, watching me with an intensity that sent a shiver of dread through my entire body. I spun around, but when I did, there was no one there. "Are you all right, miss?" The bartender's voice broke through the haze, and I turned to look at him, startled. His eyes were now wide with concern, but there was something strange in them, something that made me uneasy. "Yeah, I think so," I said, trying to steady myself, though I could feel the panic rising in my throat. What's in this drink?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he just stared at me for a long moment, his eyes calculating. Then finally he spoke, his voice low and serious. "Don't drink it," he said, almost a warning, his tone heavy with something I couldn't quite place. But it was too late. The drink had already taken hold of me. The room seemed to spin, the whispers in my head growing louder, more frantic. The man in the mirror was still there, standing behind me, and I could feel his presence, cold and oppressive, pressing in from every side. And the worst part? I knew I wasn't the only one who could see him. Suddenly, everything became clear. The bartender's hesitation, the strange sensation that crept over me, the shadowy figure in the reflection. It all made sense. The drink wasn't just a cocktail. It was something else, something dark, something supernatural. I bolted from my seat, throwing money on the bar without a second thought, and stumbled toward the door. I couldn't leave fast enough, my heart pounding in my chest as I pushed open the door to the night air. The cold air hit me like a slap, and for a brief moment, I felt some relief. But as I turned to look back at the bar, I could have sworn I saw the figure standing in the doorway, watching me with those glowing red eyes. I've never gone back to the old lantern since, and every time I pass that street, I get a shiver down my spine, wondering if the drink I had that night was meant for me, or for someone else. Something tells me that the drink wasn't just an ordinary cocktail. It had a purpose, and I fear the man who never left that bar will always be there, waiting for his next victim. And I'm terrified that I won't be the last one.